must do his bit.
Welcome to another edition of The Public Interest. My name is David Granger, and we continue our examination of Guyana's domestic policy as far as it relates to its foreign policy. And today we'll be looking at environmental security. It is our view that environmental security is essential for a good life. And we ask ourselves the question, can you feel yourself safe? Can citizens be safe if the country is not environmentally secure? And by that I mean the air you breathe. I mean, is there stench from a neighboring pig farm, or some factory you belching out smoke? Are your farms, if you're a farmer, you're living up the Kanji Creek or Akawini Creek, and there's heavy rainfall, is your farm secure? Because that's part of your livelihood. Are we all secure from flooding? We're in the May-June rains again, and as you know what happened last year in May-June rains, the entire country was affected by floods. Are we food secure? We know that food prices are going up and lots of things are in short supply. Even some housewives are not buying plantains and sweet potatoes anymore. I understand that shallot is selling for $600 a pound. And of course, these factors will affect our food security. Are our borders secure? When I was in office, I visited some communities at Whitewater, Kaikan, Baramita, which were affected from time to time by sindicatos from Venezuela. They're not secure. They're not secure along that 800-kilometer border with Venezuela. Are we secure from disease? I mean, do some of these unregistered migrants bring disease into the country? And we're now still in the middle of a pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. And it is quite clear that some of the disease or some of the persons bearing the disease come from abroad. They could be unregistered migrants coming across the border. Is the water we drink clean and safe to give our children? The water coming through the pipes, and maybe people living in those areas where there are no pipes at all, they depend on water from the river or a creek. Is it clean and safe? Is waste in our communities disposed of in a safe and sanitary manner? Or do people just throw the stuff in the trench or on the roadside, and they breed a lot of vermin? After a flood, are our roads in a good condition to travel on, or are they broken up because of the heavy rainfall? Do people in a nearby community live in shanty and slums and squatter settlements and other forms of irregular housing? These are questions that we ask ourselves as individuals, as citizens, as members of communities, as members of the country, Guyana. And if the answers are that we are not safe, we're not secure, well, then Guyana does not enjoy environmental security. And that is the question we have to ask ourselves. In Guyana, everyone is entitled to enjoy a good life in a safe and sanitary environment. Once a country is environmentally secure, it means that the vulnerability of the citizens would be reduced, especially in the event of natural hazard. And of course, we'd all be happier, happy families, happy communities, happy countries. But unfortunately, it is not so. And there are many vulnerable groups in society, including women, including youth, including hinterland residents, including the aged, and those who live in informal housing, shanties, slums, and squatter settlements. These people could be affected by the damage and degradation caused by environmental hazard. And this is what we're talking about today. Our country, luckily, lies below what I would call the catastrophe zone. We do not have earthquakes or hurricanes, and we don't get volcanoes, and of course, no tornadoes. And we can say that we could make ourselves environmentally secure. Our landscape, and you know my favorite 10 descriptions of our landscape: the coastland, the grasslands, the highlands, the islands, the lowlands, the wetlands, our lakes, and the Essequibo, our rainforests, our rivers and waterfalls. These are a gift of nature, a gift of God, and they all lead to making Guyana a bountiful country. But nevertheless, Guyana is susceptible to the adverse effects of climate change. And if we're talking about the challenges we face to our environmental security, we have to look at, the bureaucratic, sometimes I call it ignorance or inertia, because these are the people who have to enforce regulations. We have to look at the demographic pressures which have been exerted on our country by the massive influx of Venezuelan migrants. We have to look at the economic backwardness of some areas which are difficult to access because we don't have proper roads and railways, taking people into the hinterland. We have to look at the geographic differences between the coastland and the hinterland, and we have to look at the strategic pressure on our borders because for the last 56 years or longer, our borders have been under siege, you can say, by Venezuelan to the west and Suriname to the east. And of course, you could look at the hygienic pressures under which we survive day by day, the pressure of disease, the pressure of polluted water, the pressure of solid waste. And unfortunately, some of these environmental problems are aggravated by mismanagement. Mismanagement caused by a lack of appreciation of how the mangroves should be protected. And there has been damage to mangroves, which protect much of our coastline. There has been degradation and erosion of our soils. There has been deforestation. Even though many people live on the coast, people living on the hinterland are aware of the level of deforestation that is taking place, especially in the mining and logging communities. We could look at the destructive exploitation caused by mining and logging, particularly. We could look at pollution of the air and water and the soil by the use of harmful chemicals, and people in the hinterland are most susceptible to the damage caused by the misuse of chemicals in the logging and mining industry. All these things could aggravate the conditions under which our citizens live on a daily basis. So when we think of environmental security, we want to make our citizens secure, safe, and we have to look at the various factors. And I will name some of them. They might not be, it might not be a complete list, but at the top of the list is the air and water quality, because you have to take water every day. And many of us have grown up seeing sugarcane fields being burnt. You can look at the sky at night and see this sugarcane field being burnt. They want to drive out the snakes, and they want to burn the trash so that the cane cutters could go in next day and just cut the cane without worrying about snakes and trash. But unfortunately, the burning contributes to global warming. Similarly, in the rice fields, after the rice has been harvested, the farmers tend to burn the fields and to get rid of the stubble. And this, of course, creates huge volumes of smoke. And again, it's a contributory factor to global warming. Household waste. In some communities, there are no proper arrangements for disposing of household waste. And people throw them in the canals or leave it on the roadside or maybe burn it. And the burning itself is a contributory factor. The fumes from the huge number of vehicles, and there's a lot of vehicle congestion in some parts of the country. And there is also a lot of emission from the GPL, or main electricity supplier, and sometimes people have their private generators. GPL, for example, uses up 887,000 barrels of fuel every year. And of course, you can go by a GPS statement and see the smoke belching into the air. And every day they use up nearly 2,500 barrels of fuel to generate electricity. And these are problems that affect air quality because they affect the air that we breathe. I remember a few years ago, the citizens of Linden, particularly those on the west side of the river, complained about the dust, the bauxite dust, and the fumes coming out. And I think eventually there was some level of control. But these things affect our environmental security. So air and water quality are very important. In addition to that, disease. Uh, when there's a flood, there's always a risk of dengue, of salmonella, of hepatitis, and of course leptospirosis, caused by poor sanitation, waste, and of course the proliferation of mosquitoes, which transmit these diseases. And these things affect citizens. And I recall in the 2005 flood, people call it the Great Flood. It wasn't very great, it was massive, but it's not something you want to happen again. And there was a chairman of a certain NDC on the East Coast, and he was traveling in a little, makeshift canoe, and he fell overboard, and he took a gulp of water, and he died from leptospirosis. About 20 people died during that so-called Great Flood in 2005. So we need to think about disease. When we think about environmental security, we need to think about what is happening to our health and what is happening to our citizens, our children and loved ones. Then again, we look at farming. People go and hunt wildlife for sport. Unfortunately, some of it is not very sporting because they carry freezers, huge like boxes, into the hinterland, and they just kill wildlife on an industrial scale. Well, this is unsustainable. And in fact, Guyana is probably one of the worst, I would say, or the biggest exporters illegal exporters of wildlife. And many people in urban areas and in the countryside like to have, bushmeat. And that is a delicacy. Unfortunately, at the rate people kill these animals, we are losing some of our biodiversity because sometimes they kill endangered species. And that is a big problem. And of course, the mining and logging industry, although many of us have grown up knowing that there are a lot of mines in the hinterland and timber grants, there are over 1,100 small mining operations in the hinterland. And when you fly over the hinterland, you see these huge craters. People have just mined them out and abandoned them. And these are abscesses, these are huge craters which we will bequeath our children. Your children and grandchildren say, Granddad, what was there? I said, they took the gold and they've gone. And now there's nothing that can be grown there. These are just huge craters, like a moonscape. And, it is a big tragedy that some of these extractive industries are destroying our landscape. Then the flooding, of course. Well, the PPP has got the record for the two worst floods in memory. In 2005, it was clear that a lot of people suffered, those of you who were living in Guyana at the time. It affected our water supply, it affected healthcare, it affected electricity, garbage, and sewage disposal. The 2005 floods, as you know, affected 290,000 persons. 39% of the population was affected by the 2005 floods. And those of you who were living or who had access to Region 4 at the time would know that, some people were living on the highway. They couldn't go into their homes. Their homes were flooded out. And well, all sorts of unpleasant things happen because people have to eat and people have to dispose of waste. And as I said, it was very sad because many people died during that great flood in 2005. And last year we had a bigger flood, a worse flood. So the previous PPP administration had the 2005 flood, and the present PPP administration had what was called the worst flooding ever seen in Guyana. Every single region was affected. And of course, a lot of farmers lost their livelihood because their farms were flooded and their crops were destroyed. Some of them have not collected their so-called relief. Some people have got HIMAX, other people have got hampers. Well, you can't live a whole year without without food, and the hampers can't last a year. So there's a big problem there, and there are credible reports that many people are still suffering from 2021 floods. And now that we're in 2022, the rains have started again, so there's going to be more flooding in days and weeks to come. And another environmental problem is the forest cover. As you know, recently you've read the mangroves being destroyed. Well, the mangroves serve a purpose of protecting our coastline. And if they're destroyed, it means our coastline and our coastline will be more vulnerable because the sea level continues to rise. And rising sea level will affect our coastal defenses, our sea defenses. We used to have, as recently as 2010, we used to boast that over 90% of our territory was still covered by forests. Unfortunately, by 2021, we had lost over 9,000 hectares of forest cover. Mangrove cover has also been reduced from about 80,000 hectares in 1992, when the PNC left office, to 22,000 hectares in 2009. So you can see that both the hinterland forests, the montane forests, and the coastal mangrove forests have been declining. These forests are important. They help to mitigate the impact of greenhouse gases and global warming. So once the forests are cut down, we are going to run into hotter days. And my favorite quotation, the Amerindians say, trees hold up the sky, and if you cut down the trees, the sky will fall. And what is happening? People are enduring some extremely hot weather now because of the loss of forest cover. And then, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, the illegal wildlife trade. Guyana is the single largest exporter of illegal exporter of wild-caught animals in the continent of South America. Per capita, we are worse than Colombia, Venezuela, Brazil, or any other forested country in South America. Our grasslands and our wetlands are really teeming with biodiversity. But they are also the destination for illegal capture and commercial sale of wildlife. Some people even try to put some of our rare birds in curlers and export them to foreign countries. And of course, the iguanas and the snakes and the parrots and the macaws, all of these animals, these birds and animals are trapped and sometimes exported or sometimes just consumed. So it is a practice which is to be condemned because our wildlife, our biodiversity are being depleted. And then you have the infrastructure. Roadways and sea defenses are affected by rising sea levels and by flooding. And during the so-called Great Flood, we lost about 600 kilometers of roadways, which had to be repaired, and at the cost of over $16 million US. And so these extreme spring tides and storm surges cause severe erosion, particularly those parts of the coastline which have mud embankments, earthen embankments. And then, of course, the seafood, as you know, since the petroleum industry started offshore, there has been a marked decline in seafood production. Um, in 2019, we were exporting over 20,000 tons of seafood products, which is, 24,000 tons less than in 2018. And of course, it continues to decline. Fishermen reported that their worst years ever, because they make their living, it was in 2020 and 2021. And the PPP administration in the National Assembly recently admitted that the fishing sector is projected to have contracted, by 17%. So when you speak of environmental security, we're speaking about the gradual impoverishment of citizens who depend on the environment for their survival. And then, of course, you have other factors like the squatting settlements. Squatting, as well as the shanties and the slums, these three together form a tripod of irregular housing. And 15% of our population, over 110,000 people, still live in these informal settlements. And by my calculation, there are about 180 squatter settlements still in existence in Guyana. And of course, people who live in these squatted settlements are least likely to get access to public utilities, health services, sanitary services, and of course, things like telecommunications or electricity services and other public services. So living in these conditions mean that life is very insecure for our people. And this is something we must think about. My friends, when we speak of environmental security, we also have to think about the hinterland, because the hinterland occupies about 75% of our country. And the degradation of waterways, the pollution of surface water and groundwater, and the high turbidity. And some of you who travel to the hinterland would know that these rivers, which used to be so beautiful in our postcards, are now looking like chocolate. The turbidity caused by mining, made some of the rivers undrinkable, unusable. And you can imagine what happens to communities downstream. They're affected by all the turbidity and the chemical pollution, contamination from upstream. And then, of course, you have the demographic pressure in the hinterland, because these thousands and thousands of Venezuelan migrants, some of them eventually trickle into Region 2 and Region 3, but the majority are in Region 1. And right now, the number of Venezuelan migrants exceeds the population of the Borimo-Waini region. There are about 36,000 Venezuelan migrants in the country and 26,000 residents, Guyanese-born residents of the Borimo-Waini region. And all along that border, that 800-kilometer border, there's banditry, there's crime, attacks by syndicatos, harassment, and of course there's illegal movement by persons bringing disease into our country. There has to be firmer management of migration. And right now, nobody can say who is managing that migration. Of course, when the APNU-UFC coalition was in government, we set up a particular department, a special department called the Department of Citizenship to manage migration. But the PPP has gotten rid of that, among other things. But those migrants, a huge community in themselves, are faced with agricultural, educational, occupational, cultural, medical, legal, and security issues. And these matters have to be attended to if we are to make Guyana environmentally secure. My friends, water is life. And many of our hinterland communities depend on getting the water from the rivers and creeks. And if those rivers and creeks are polluted, it means that people are going to get sick. Especially pregnant women will run into some medical problems because of the danger of drinking contaminated water, or the danger of eating fish um, which swim in that water, or bathing and washing and drinking water from those creeks and rivers. So environmental security is not something we should ignore. Uh, we need a national environmental security plan. There's no plan. There may be some ad hoc responses. In the flood, you're going to find people going out with hampers and handouts, but there's no plan. Uh, I don't know if that's a plan. Whenever there's a flood, get a few truckloads of hampers and keep the people happy for a few weeks, and then it's back to business as usual. That won't work. We need a plan for the continuous and sustainable management of the environment. The administration management of the environment is a bit absent-minded now. It's only last month, April, when the rains had started to fall, that we heard that $32 billion will be allocated for drainage and irrigation. Well, between April and May, June rains, how much can you do, in terms of coastal defenses and repair of canals and so on? They should have made that decision in May 2021, and now in May 2022, we are now hearing that $32 billion will be provided for drainage and irrigation. Now that the rains have started, well, some people are going to get hurt during the present May June, and what we need right now, because of our insecure environmental condition, is strengthened conservancies, and we need strengthened sea defenses. We don't need stadiums. What we need are conservancies and sea defenses to make sure that our people are safe. Later on, the stadiums will come. But right now, we have a big problem in terms of providing for our environmental security. Our coalition, the APNUAFC coalition, created a Department of the Environment in 2016, the year after we got into office. And we put out a Green State Development Strategy to ensure that the environmental stewardship of our country, to ensure that our rivers and our waterways will be protected and made more secure. We want to strengthen neighborhoods. We want to strengthen town councils and municipalities. We want to strengthen regional administration to improve sanitary services. That is why our administration created, for the first time in decades, 4 towns: Bartico, Mabaruma, Madia, and Lethem, in order to provide better services, including environmental security services, to the hinterland. Environmental security is a pillar of economic development. We cannot develop this country unless we pay more attention to the environment and to protecting the lives of citizens. People first. People first. Oil and gas will come later. Right now, it is food and water. That's what we need now. My friends, our coalition, the APNUFC coalition, created a Green State strategy. And that is a model for environmental stewardship. It demonstrated how we can play a big role in protecting our air, water, and land for future generations. We mustn't squander this gift that we have of being, the biggest and most bountiful, most beautiful country in the Caribbean. We shouldn't squander it because of bad management. Good governance is essential to preserving the integrity of our ecosystems, to promoting environmental security. And in this way, before anything else comes, we can ensure that our people could aim at, could look forward to having a good life in this country of their birth. Thank you, and may God bless you.
Each man must do his